This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Travalis Herbicide from FMC. When you need to protect cereals from a long list of the toughest in-crop weeds, Travalis Herbicide is powerful performance in one small package. You don't need to crush your back when what you really want to do is crush weeds.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. It is Good Friday, but going to give you a timestamp. We're recording this on Thursday. In prep for the Easter weekend. I want to wish everybody in the Real Agriculture audience a very, very happy Easter. And before we get to that and spending time with friends and family and everything that happens on an Easter weekend, we are going to have a RealAg Issues panel here today, as well as a beef market update with Anne Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange. The panel today is going to be Stuart Person. He is VP of Agriculture with MNP based out of Edmonton, Alberta. We also have Lyndsey Smith and Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture. We've got avian influenza in a dairy animal in the U.S. What does that mean for the dairy sector in Canada and the U.S.? We've got a budget coming up from the federal government. We've got the issues with that major cargo boat in Baltimore destroying that bridge. What does it mean for the shipping lanes and the distribution of product? Fertilizer, coal, farm machinery, very much impacted. We've also got changes to the cash advance program in Canada, and really concerning if it comes to fruition, we've got both of our major national railways, CPKC and CN Rail, potentially under strike action at the same time. We need to get that fixed. There's going to be big ramifications of that if it comes to be true and a reality. So looking forward to the discussion today on the RealAg Issues panel. Now, if you have any feedback on today's program, or maybe it's something we don't even talk about, you want to ask questions, you want to provide your perspective, your opinions, your thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. So you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms, or you are more than welcome to call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to get to Anne Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange and talk about what's going on in this week's beef market. So shortened week because of the holiday. What has been the impact from a pricing situation? And then we will get to the RealAg Issues panel. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
I am Lyndsey Smith. Today's show, of course, brought to you by Koch Agronomic Services. And joining me now is Bryce Geisel. So what should farmers be keeping in mind about protecting nitrogen?
Well, the main thing, there are three forms of nitrogen loss. The key one with spring nitrogen applications is volatilization. And in order to mitigate it, we need to inhibit the specific enzymes in the soil to keep that nitrogen in the field.
So how then, though, if I want to make the best decision for the fertilizer that I've got, how do I know the level of rate or that the product that I'm using has got the right amount of stabilizer in it?
There are lots of good sources that you can kind of utilize to find that information. It's always good to talk to an agronomist, talk to the manufacturer, to your retail, and have those questions. So our products are the standard that researchers use here in Canada and are scientifically proven to work. You can find a comparison of various nitrogen stabilizers at defendyourn.ca. And there you can learn more about active ingredient rates and see how other products stack up to our agronomically effective solutions.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. You know, Invita bridges the nitrogen gap all season long, enabling your corn crop to fix the nitrogen it needs from the atmosphere when and where it needs it most. Let Invita set your crop up for success by requesting it from your local retailer. Okay, let's talk to Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, for this week's beef market update. And great to chat with you.
It is good to be with you today, Shaun.
Yeah, lots happening right now in the cattle markets. Last week, some all-time highs. This week, a little bit weaker on the futures front. But I want to get to the avian influenza and the impact it has had on a few dairy animals. It's had some impact on the markets this week.
Well, like we always say, Shaun, anytime markets are dealing with a surprise or uncertainty, this is the reaction. So here we go. The market was already dealing with a bit of a bearish report on feed report from last Friday. We'll talk about that in a second. But then also earlier this week, this confirmation from USDA of some of these older dairy cows in Kansas and Texas that had contracted avian influenza. And just so listeners know, it's spread by wild birds, as you've likely heard. It acts like a flu and tends to affect what they've seen and said so far, older dairy cows. So obviously no impact on milk or meat quality, no threat to human health, but this has created a surprise in the markets. It does reduce milk production 10 to 20% in these affected cows, and then they tend to recover about 10 to 14 days later. So that's what USDA has told us this week. Markets, especially the futures markets, have responded. The managed money funds have liquidated their positions as they tend to do with these unknowns. And that has put some pressure. So let's start with the cash, Shaun. We did see just here this morning, we've seen some southern trade in Texas and Kansas, two lower than last week at 186. The northern trade kind of ranging, just light trade between 183 and 188. 298 dressed, which is about $4 lower than last week. And again, as you mentioned at the onset, this is after posting an all-time high last week for fat cattle in the U.S. The 5-area average was 189.56. So that's kind of where we sit. And I guess let's just carry on. The market was also, like I said a minute ago, dealing with a bearish February placement number from last Friday's cattle on feed report. So that didn't help matters either. We kind of were on our heels in terms of market action when the avian influenza news came out. So what did that report say last Friday? Well, February placements were up 10%. But I'm going to hedge my bet a little bit. And when I add January, because January was so off with the winter weather in January, and February was up. When you put the two together, year-to-date placements in the 2 months are up 1%. That was just like Canada for the Western Canadian on-feed report. February, big placements, but when you added it with January, it was actually down 2%. So I think sometimes when you have these crazy up and down months, it's wise to look at a little broader picture. And then I guess, Shaun, we're heading into a short week. Well, we're in a short week heading into a holiday weekend. So we have to talk a little bit about demand. And I think no surprise probably to anybody that's been in the grocery store lately, but on the demand side, pork was the winner for this Easter break for sure. So that choice cutout that I always talk about every week, it's down $5 this week compared to the end of last week. It closed at 308.5. And again, pork the winner. It certainly is trading at a big discount to beef, and so that's not a surprise in my opinion. So I guess some things we'll be watching for as we go forward, Shaun, and see what happens from there.
I was kind of, and not to say it's the same, it's not the same thing, but I was reminded this week during the avian influenza release that came out from USDA, and I believe it was National Milk Producers Federation, mentioned don't export markets, you don't need to close borders. And it kind of triggered a memory for me back to, was it 03, BSE, borders closed? I sort of had this mental memory trigger to oh my God. It's just so funny how events can remind you of other situations.
You must be Canadian.
Is that what that means? Okay. Hey, as we look ahead to the fall here, and which is still some time away because we haven't even really engaged in spring yet. But boy, I'll tell you, this feeder market, it's definitely giving signals to ranchers that pricing is looking pretty good here for 24. Is that a fair statement, or what are your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. So we're on the supply piece, right? So some of the demand question marks I think are valid, but on the supply piece, we know what we've got, and that's a considerably smaller beef supply in both the U.S. and Canada here in 24. So that's what's been pushing prices higher. It's what will continue to keep the market solid. Now, does the market go straight up like kind of the trend we saw in 23? Well, no, I don't think so, because last year we saw the markets moving to this new trading range. Now we're here. And so I think as we go through 24, one of the things I'll be watching for is more of what are the seasonal patterns. So for fed cattle, that's spring high, summer low. I'm still kind of leaning that direction. In terms of feeder cattle, typically we see the market continue to grind higher as we go through the spring and into the summer and make their highs in August or September. Is that in the cards? I still think that's in the cards for sure. So those are the things that we'll be watching as we go forward. But demand is, I think, one of our biggest question marks. It decides how far can we go? Where do the highs get placed? Was last week's high the high for this year? Those kinds of questions I think will come out more as we see how demand fares in the second quarter.
And if we get, okay, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, but if we do get moisture, we've got big wet snow right now, which is definitely making people feel better about themselves and their grass. Is this the year that maybe people are like, okay, yeah, heifer retention?
Well, when you look at some of the markets that are trading right now with some of these replacement type heifers, I mean, the prices are phenomenal. So I already think, for maybe not for everyone, but certainly for some producers out there, that is what's in the cards and driving some of the strength that's going on right now. So, and again, math is math in terms of what these calves are going to trade for or what they're expected to trade for vis-a-vis what the cow is worth, so those things are driving this market higher. And I think that will continue to provide strong support as we go through the year.
Yeah, like to use this, it is, it was opening day this week, and to use a sports reference, it's teams are going to pay in free agency is similar to how feed yards are going to have to pay for feeder animals. They're going to have to buck up. Hey, and This has been fantastic. Have yourself a great Easter weekend. Okay.
Okay, you too. Thanks, Shaun, for the time.
We'll be right back on RealAg Radio with the RealAg Issues Panel right after this.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. And welcome back to RealAg Radio. It's now time for the RealAg Issues Panel here on this Friday. But first, I want to talk to you about Super U, the best answer for agronomically effective dual nitrogen protection. Super U Premium Fertilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how this ready-to-use granular fertilizer protects nitrogen and boosts efficiency, visit kochag.ca. Okay, let's get to our panel. Let's bring them in. First up, it is Kelvin Heppner coming in of Altona, Manitoba. Hey, Kelvin, how are you doing?
Doing well here, Shaun. Happy Easter, everyone.
Happy Easter. Happy Easter. I love a good Easter egg hunt.
Yes. We've got kids at home that, of course, are looking forward to it this weekend. So, yeah, we'll get our fill of chocolate.
Are you an inside the house egg hunt or outside the house egg hunt?
it all depends on the weather, and I'm thinking we're inside this year.
Okay. Well, just as fun. Just as fun. Also joining us is Lyndsey Smith out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm also going to be doing an Easter egg hunt this weekend. We could probably do it outside. We don't have any snow, so we could.
But the Easter Bunny then, though, has to have bigger eggs for the outside hunt, don't they?
Yes, I would assume so.
So
I don't know. I haven't asked.
Yeah, the bunny has a lot of looking at weather reports and forecasting.
That's right.
It's not as easy of a job as some people would make it out to be.
We don't want snow on our Easter eggs. That's right.
No. The chocolate gets hard. Okay. Also joining us is Stuart Person. He is Senior VP for Agriculture at MNP, based out of Edmonton. Hey, Stuart, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Shaun?
I'm doing really good. You ready for Easter?
Yeah, I'm at the my kids are actually at the age now where I go to bed way before them, so I think they should actually hide the eggs, and then when I get up in the morning, I should find them.
Yes.
That's a really good idea. That's a super good idea.
Yeah,
I love when they're younger too. You just hide a few in spots where they don't find them, and then you just go find them after.
It's a stash.
Or then eventually you reach an age where you hide them, and then you go through the process of trying to find them too.
Yeah, exactly.
And you forget.
When you're hiding your own Easter eggs, there's a problem. There's a saying about that. I can't remember. Anyway, okay, lots happened this week. I think the biggest news story out there in the ether is definitely what's happened with the freight boat carrying all the containers. I think over 3,000 containers that crashed into the bridge in Baltimore. Lyndsey, you talked to Mike Steenhoek from the Soy Transportation Coalition earlier this week. We played that here on RealAg Radio. I, for one, did not realize the amount of business that port was doing in Baltimore.
Absolutely mind-boggling. And not just the amount of business, and it's staggering. Like, overall, it's staggering. But for agriculture equipment, mind-blowing. I had no idea how much equipment, as they call it, the roll-on, roll-off, went through the Port of Baltimore. It is an incredibly important port for equipment, specifically. Some grain, as you said, we talked to Mike, so certainly there is containerized grain traffic. There is some bulk imports that come in through the Port of Baltimore, not as many bulk exports that go out, but definitely it is important on the grain side, but really the key here is on the equipment side. It is a very key port. And just billions of dollars of economy that goes through it. And we did talk briefly, and we've seen since then, of course, with the recovery effort. But the discussion now is all about, getting the debris cleaned up and getting, the actual channel and the river cleaned up to actually start movement again. It's going to be a long time. Like, it is a mess. And so that's a big question mark then of where does stuff get diverted to and how you handle all of that for sure.
Yeah, I think I saw on Bloomberg that they're expecting the port to be closed for 2 to 4 weeks.
It'll be a while.
Which is significant, especially for coal. Major port for coal.
Fertilizer too.
Fertilizer,
yeah.
It originally took them 5 years to build the bridge.
Yes.
I haven't seen, I think it's pretty early, I have not seen any sort of speculation on how long it will take to rebuild. This is, I'm sure Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, they were putting a lot of resources into getting this bridge built as quickly as possible. 31 to 35,000 people cross that bridge daily. Couldn't imagine what this is doing to traffic. Never mind the lives lost as well. It's a crazy situation. Kelvin, it does again remind us of the importance of infrastructure. When these kind of tragic things happen, what happens when we do not have those pieces of infrastructure in place? It's a major disruption.
For sure, and a bottom. Well, if trade has led to all these efficiencies, but it leads to kind of a focus here on one port where a lot of equipment, like Lyndsey said, a lot of agricultural machinery from overseas and also stuff that's made in North America that's headed overseas goes through the Port of Baltimore. And so now all these companies are caught trying to readjust. And like you said, Shaun, this is, I guess, why it's important that we have all the risk mitigation stuff in place to prevent scenarios from this happening. And I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of focus on that in the coming months, and as well with clearing that debris out of the way. I've heard longer projections, like months, that the port could be closed. So that's that's a little bit head scratching to me, just given the significance of it. And to me, it shouldn't be that hard to pull some of that metal out of the way that they can get boats through there again. But I guess they've got to check everything off to make sure it's all safe and good to go. But yeah, that is a big issue right now, is how long is it going to take to move that out of the way and get the port opening again, running again.
Stuart, the one thing we've been very educated on since 2020, and maybe it's more a case of we underappreciated some of the things that were happening behind the scenes from a supply chain standpoint. You think about going back to the pandemic and how ports were closed, goods couldn't move, and we had obviously the beginning of what has been this inflationary period. Then you have an event like this week. All these things just sort of happened, and things just showed up places when you wanted them to. And we've learned a lot about our logistical shipping system globally with all the trade that is happening basically since 2020. It's been much more on the radar.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously we are able to adapt in some of these situations. I'm sure they'll find some alternative routes in this case, but it's not going to go unnoticed. The one thing that I'm concerned about is the fertilizer discussion, and I'm not sure if it's fertilizer coming in or going out, but somebody's going to likely be pinched on fertilizer as a result of this if they can't figure out another avenue. And I know in North America we import a lot of phos. We generally have our own nitrogen and potash, but we do import a lot of phos. So if there's phos coming in there, my concern would be for whether it's U.S. farmers or Canadian farmers who's getting shorted. Assuming it's a just-in-time delivery that's coming right now.
Yeah, somebody's getting the short end of the stick for sure. We also saw this week, Stuart, changes to the cash advance program. What's your thoughts on that alteration?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I want to point out is that it's funny they let it go back to 100,000, and now they've increased it up to 250. So it sounds like a great announcement, but really it was 350 last year, right? 350,000 interest free. So it's still a reduction over last year. You know what? To be honest, I'm glad they did it. I applaud the government for doing this. We're going into a year this year where we have, inflation and other factors have driven the cost of production up significantly. We've got on the grains and oilseeds or cash cropping side, depending on where you are, we've got commodity prices have fallen. And so we are going to be in a pinch this year. So this is welcome news. Having it at 250,000 actually makes it significant enough, that it's going to have an impact on farms. So I think that, more producers need to take a look at it. You should be using this if you're not already using it or you haven't in the past. You should be taking a look at this and using it for your farm. It is a good benefit.
Do you know what the utilization rate is? Like, what is the uptake?
It's been poor. I don't know, Kelvin or Lyndsey, if you have statistics on it, but it's not been great. We spent a lot of time last year working with our clients to try and convince them that it was a good thing, and we actually got a lot more clients into the program. But again, it has to get to a certain number before the interest benefit is, and you have to have a high enough interest rate before the interest benefit is significant, right? So in this case, at these interest rates and at these type of numbers of interest free, it is more significant. So producers are saying, yeah, I'm going to take the time to fill out the paperwork.
Yeah, Lyndsey?
So I guess that's my question is, what would hold someone back? Because it's my understanding and in talking to some farmers who use this program, it's relatively straightforward once you get in the swing of things. But, I even this week we got our risk management, our RMP checks for lamb. So we have some price protection on lamb here in Ontario. And I was talking to a neighbor and I said, did you get your check? It's always welcome to get some of this money back and from the premium that you pay. And he's like, the paperwork's just not worth it. And it's actually not that hard. Like, it's really not that difficult, the paperwork to do. And for what it costs and what you end up back, especially with an RMP, it is a bit of a subsidy in that you typically get back your premium plus. But it's not that hard. So Stuart, maybe that's a question for you, is like, how cumbersome is some of this paperwork? It seems like, we've got several different organizations that manage the cash advance. They seem very helpful. So is it really difficult to take advantage of?
No, it's not that difficult at all. I mean, but it does take some time. It's not, it's not like it's a click the box and I'm in. You do have to provide some info. So, I mean, I would suggest that if you took the number of hours that it takes you to get this application in and done, and you compare the benefit you're getting paid quite well by the hour for that time. So you kind of got to think of it that way. If you don't want to do it, we helped a lot of our clients do their applications that, either felt that they weren't comfortable doing it or just didn't feel they had time. Even with us being paid to do it, the farmer was way ahead by just getting it done. So the one thing I will say though is, depending on how long you've been farming, if you took the cash advance, say years ago, sometimes producers forgot that they took the cash advance, and then when they went to sell their grain, the check didn't show up, and they're like, "Oh yeah, crap!" So there's been people burned up on that one in the past, and they feel like, I'm not going to make that mistake again. So they're a little bit hesitant to use it. But I mean, it's just a matter of remembering, and doing some bookkeeping, saying, "Hey, I've got this out there that I got to repay."
Yeah, good point.
Right now, with interest rates where they are, it's definitely worth more than what it was participating 3-4 years ago as well. Just to have that money, even if you put it into a savings account and collect interest on it, is definitely, there's value there. I dug up the numbers here. Just under 12,000 farmers participated in it last year. And so the government is saying they're anticipating additional savings on interest costs of $4,916 on average in terms of interest cost savings from this change that was made this week.
Okay. I'll just make one more comment, if that's okay, Shaun, on this. The one thing I would say on this program that I wish that we would take a harder look at is, as farms get bigger and bigger, the maximum you can get is $1 million per farm, which is great if you're a smaller farm. But I mean, as the farms get bigger, that $1 million is not really sufficient for what some of the producers would need. And the 250 interest free becomes a very small number for them. So I really wish that they would base these programs based on your productive units rather than just a flat out cap.
Well, the trouble is, though, then someone writes a headline, farmer gets $5 million, or the largest farms get X. Right, the same sort of issue in the U.S. with some of the programs is focusing on trying to help or assist smaller farms over larger farms, as if I'm with you though, Stuart. That $1 million cap really limits some of the participation from some of the larger farms from engaging in the program. So yeah, that's a really good point. Okay,
I always say when those things come out, if you want to compare that stat, we could also compare how much tax the large farms pay versus the small ones, and let's see who's paying more tax.
Quite true. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to take a break. We've got Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture, as well as Stuart Person, Senior VP of Agriculture with MNP. We'll be right back here on RealAg Radio right after this.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground, we are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
And we are back here on RealAg Radio for the RealAg Issues Panel. Shaun Haney, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, and Stuart Person from MNP. Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more by going to excitebio.ca. Well, one of the big concerns that I have, and this hasn't happened yet, so there's still time to fix it. Kelvin, what is happening with this potential rail strike? And when I say strike, we should put rail in plural, because we've got kind of an issue here where both railways could be hit by job action at the same time? What's happening?
Yeah, so this is the Teamsters Union that seems to have more disagreement with the railways when it comes to collective bargaining, and also represents a large majority of employees for both CN and CPKC. They have a strike vote happening here on April 8th. Contracts that took effect a couple of years ago have expired at the end of 2023 with both railways, and so now there's more than 9,000 employees at both CN and CPKC that are working on an old contract, and the railways both on the same day back in February asked for a federally appointed mediator. That doesn't seem to have come to any resolution, at least not yet. They were still meeting this week, but there will be a vote now on April 8th, and it looks like the soonest that job action could take place is end of May sometime, May 22nd or something like that. So, yeah, we're on potentially again on going through this cycle another time. Of course, you can go look back. It was back in 2022 that we had a rail strike at CP. CN's last strike was in 2019, and the previous three negotiations with between CP and the Teamsters Rail Conference Union, going back to 2012, 2015, and 2018, and then again in 2022, there have been work stoppages, all four of those, and so here we are again, and yeah, it's certainly not going to be helpful, and I think we can talk about this, what this means for Canada's reputation as a reliable supplier with so much of what we export dependent on rail for getting to export position.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Stuart. Like, it feels like we're constantly talking about some sort of rail disruption. And one of the other concerning issues here is that there's a lot of grain still on farm from the 23 crop. So we could see higher volumes in a non-traditional high volume period, which would be May through August 1st, potentially, and this strike would not be well timed. You gotta ask the question, what exactly are we doing as a country here, and how do we fix this?
Yeah, it's extremely frustrating. Like the dates that Kelvin was mentioning, it just seems like it's happening way too frequently. And for our perception on the world stage, I mean, as Kelvin said, we're a major exporter of agriculture products and other products, potash, oil, whatever else you want to add to the list. This is not good for our reputation, right? So, but getting back to the grain piece, yeah, there's a lot of grain sitting on farms, and what you're going to see is you might even see some upticks in the market where farmers want to take advantage of it, but you're likely going to see a huge negative basis thrown on by the grain buyers because they're not going to be able to move it. So they're not going to want it, right? The system will plug up quick, and we won't even be able to take advantage of it as producers, those of us who are sitting on any grain. So, I mean, it's not good for our country. It's not good for agriculture. It would sure be nice if they could find some ways to lock in some longer term agreements so we don't have this constant interruption happening.
Yeah, and it does seem like agreements have been shorter as of late. Like it feels like the cycle has increased. That's my perception. I don't know if that's not the reality, but
I think that is. I think that would hold true if you looked at the dates.
Okay.
These arbitrated agreements over the last few times that there's been work stoppages where they haven't been able to come to an agreement, they've been arbitrated, and it does seem like to get them across the finish line, they've been getting shorter and shorter, and then they take effect retroactively because it's often at least 6 months since they expired. So then you blink and the contract is expired again, and they have to work on it again. So it is interesting that both railways are doing this at the same time. I can't recall a different time where we've had both CN and CPKC working, negotiating with the Teamsters on the exact same timeline like this. So I don't know whether that's intentional or whether there's some strategic stuff behind that in terms of a negotiating approach to negotiating with the union.
You know, Lyndsey, the other thing we saw this week is farmers in the UK. Now, they were smaller protests than we've seen on the mainland of Europe, but I believe it's the first protest we've seen in the UK. Farmers pushing back, saying they can't compete against, I should say, Australian or New Zealand goods coming into the country. Mm-hmm. It really this whole theme of increased protectionism continues to bubble to the surface amongst farming communities, really all over the world.
Well, and so we've also seen, of course, this isn't strictly an agriculture thing, but what we've definitely seen in the past few months is, yes, as you mentioned, France, Poland, Germany, like and for different reasons and for similar reasons and then for different reasons again. But I think as well, when we see these things happen, other farmers see this happen, they want to join in. There's similarities of what they're fighting for, and so it starts to snowball, right? So we start to see more of it. And so you're right, we did see it in the UK as well, and one of the key sticking points was trade. And so, from a Canadian perspective, we're in the midst of, some of these trade negotiations, discussions with the UK. We had France, the French farmers saying they don't want to ratify CETA. They don't want these trade deals because of protectionism. Exactly that. They want, more support at home for what they do. At the same time, these are also countries that the UK especially is very happy to send their products here. So they do export to Canada quite a bit and benefit from that as well. But I think it's shedding light on perhaps a larger issue, in sort of that issue of, farmers not feeling like they've been necessarily well treated or even part of the conversation on a lot of these things. And the issues that farmers have and the problems that farmers have fallen largely on deaf ears for a long time. And thinking specifically about whether that's, access to pesticides or whether it's the farm to fork or whatever, whether it's sustainability measures, whatever the case may be, there's, this rising argument really amongst farmers saying, we haven't necessarily been listened to, and now we're not necessarily being treated fairly, and you expect us to compete in international markets that aren't maybe necessarily being treated the same. Like, does it sound a little familiar? Like, I would say that although the details are different from country to country, Canada included, the same sort of underlying issue is at play here. And a large part of it is farmers don't feel like they are actually part of the conversations that directly impact their line of work, their bottom line, their farm families, the whole bit.
Right, but
and
I guarantee you there is data to show that trade is good for the UK farmer.
Well, as I said, UK stuff comes here and they do very well. Like, we have an issue in Canada where we're seeing a whole bunch of stuff coming this way with our trade deal and not seeing, the pork and the beef go back the other way. Like, there are legit trade issues here where we are on the receiving end, but there isn't anything going back. So that's not really trade, right? That's one-way trade, and that's not how trade deals are supposed to work. So yes, to your point, trade is actually incredibly valuable to a lot of these countries, but that doesn't mean that that's necessarily being communicated or being, perhaps completely realized by the farmers individually.
Well, go ahead, Kelvin.
So I was just going to say that's kind of the discussion that we've seen over the last number of years when it comes to this whole era of free trade and globalization, where countries have benefited on the net in huge amounts from trade, but that those benefits haven't necessarily been shared everywhere, and there have been people that have fallen behind, and that is where we're hearing a lot of these protests coming from. The rally that took place in the UK today, it was called Save British Farming, that's what the organizers called themselves, and they had three key asks. One was to block substandard imports, one was to end dishonest food labeling, and the other was to take action to address fears over national food security. That's in line with what Lyndsey's saying, but also that is a major concern for countries like Canada and the US that we like to be involved in trade, and we like to have export markets for the stuff that we grow and produce.
Well, I think one of the compounding issues here is that when governments have specifically in the UK and Europe, have protected them with high levels of subsidies, and there is not exactly the mentality from a competitive standpoint to want to compete on the global stage because you've been so insulated by the government funneling you money behind the scenes. Yeah. I think that there's a mentality issue here. They're not comfortable with competing against Australia and New Zealand because, quite frankly, they've really never had to.
Stuart? Yeah, it would be interesting to see what the math looks like. I mean, obviously, our firm doesn't do any accounting in Europe or in England, but it would be interesting to see what the math looks like for these farms. I mean, at the end of the day, one would hope that that these farmers are behaving like business people, and if some of these things like the trade issues, or whether it's some of the environmental issues that they're struggling with over there, if they're causing those farms to no longer be profitable and the subsidies they're getting aren't enough to keep them in the black versus the red, that could be driving some of the anxiety as well, right? So I don't have any statistics to share on that, unfortunately. Maybe one of you do, but I think that's probably some of the anxiety as well, as they're worried about is it financially feasible to keep doing what they're being asked to do.
Yeah, if there's no trade, then maybe there's a reckoning on, well, then you can't produce in the same volume some of the commodities that you currently are, because let's use a Canadian example that I've been telling audiences in some of my speeches is like we can't consume all the lentils that we're producing. Yeah. So if we do not have trade, we need to grow a significant less amount of lentils. Yeah. I don't know what we're moving to with the acres that we have, because we don't have the population to support the numbers. Well, the math doesn't work.
And for European, go ahead, Kelvin.
I was just quickly, as a rule of thumb, the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance says that half of what's grown on Canadian farms in total is exported or ends up in export markets.
Yep.
Yeah. And Pete actually shared a neat stat last week on The Word about how 1 out of every 5 bites of food has crossed an international border. So globally, 20% of 1 out of every bite has crossed an international border. So the thing is, when we think about France, when we think about Italy, when we think about the UK and their specialty cheeses and meats and all those sorts of things, that's just it. If they're only going to sell them in their neighborhood, guess what? They don't need to produce nearly as much. So as much as, to Stuart's point, yes, there's bigger picture, broader economic discussions to have, but ultimately these are farmers that do actually benefit from trade as well. And having no trade would significantly change their livelihood as well.
Well, and you know what? More and more of these countries become protectionists and don't want to participate in free trade deals. Opportunity for Canada, if we maintain our focus on opening up markets, it removes competitors from the global trade market, potentially. Now, it also removes some potential buyers.
Yeah.
But
is it, though? Because the UK still wants to export their cheese to Canada.
Yeah.
Well, we have to have the brains to say no. That's
Is it brains?
Well, I don't know, or maybe the gall or the threat. I don't know how the best way to put that. But
guts. I don't know.
Anyway, okay.
It's funny because we're all fighting about this with countries that are actually all very food secure, and then you look at there's a number of countries that are in a famine situation right now, and they can't get it.
Yeah.
It's sad.
Okay, got to take a break. We'll be back with more here on the RealAg Issues panel. But first, I want to tell you about Volterra EZ and Fierce EZ from New Farm. Get ahead of hard-to-kill weeds, spray after spring thaw for up to 8 weeks of extended weed control this spring. Find out more about New Farm products by going to newfarm.ca. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this pre-Easter edition. It's Good Friday. Of course, we're recording this on Thursday afternoon. It's a bit of a timestamp for everybody in case something big happens. And why didn't you talk about this? Well, that's why. We're recording on Thursday here before the Easter holiday weekend. And want to wish all of the Real Agriculture audience a very, very happy Easter. For balanced nutrition with micronutrients, the best answer is Wolftrax DDP from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how Wolftrax can ensure your nutrient availability through a crop's growth cycle, visit kochag.ca. We've got Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, myself of Real Agriculture, as well as Stuart Person, Senior VP for Agriculture with MNP. Now, Lyndsey, this week, I haven't been following this story, so I would like you to kind of fill us in on the significance of this, but we've got avian influenza, which we've heard a lot about in the poultry sector, but it's in some dairy animals in the U.S. What's at work here?
So this is very concerning and also perhaps not the worst thing. Okay, so it is important that we understand what's happening. And we know that avian influenza or high path avian influenza, HPAI, can infect species other than birds. That has happened before. It has happened in some wildlife. That was, I believe it was last year. Kelvin can probably correct me on this. It happens in the wild bird populations, but of course gets into our domestic bird populations, chickens, turkeys, what have you, and just decimates flocks and is, as the name implies, highly pathogenic, so it spreads very quickly, and is highly fatal. So what we had was there was a so-called mystery illness that some dairy cattle in Texas had exhibited, and they were looking into it. So we have now got confirmation that in Texas and Kansas both, there were dairy cattle that had tested positive for HPAI, so it's an influenza A virus. What they're saying so far is that there isn't any evidence of animal to animal, so cow to cow transmission, but the cows themselves have got it. There was also a goat reported in Minnesota. So these are ruminants. So this is a different sort of type of animal, certainly, than birds. And the first time we've seen it in ruminants. But again, the most concerning part would certainly be if we're seeing species to species transmission, right? So within the cattle herd, if that virus has mutated that not just one animal can get sick, but it can actually replicate and then spread to another of the same species, that would be a much more significant leap than the fact that a cow has got it. So this is significant. This is, I don't want to downplay the significance of this. This is an incredibly, incredibly devastating disease. We don't want this to be happening. At the same time, as of right now, anyway, we're not seeing it. So cow-to-cow transmission has not happened. So that is incredibly important. And as we learned through the pandemic, we learned probably way more about viruses than we ever wanted to. It is still concerning because every time a virus is taken into a different species, whatever, it does have the chance to mutate, or these mutations happen, and that potentially could lead to, so the more time we have this mixing happening, the more times it happens, the more likely it can start to spread animal to animal per se. So we definitely don't want any of these infections to happen, and we need to be taking precautions so that they don't, especially with poultry, but that is not necessarily happening now from cow to cow, let's say.
One of the things I thought of, Kelvin, like when we talk about biosecurity, I think of like the hog industry. I think of the poultry sector for sure. There are biosecurity measures like on a dairy farm. It's not in the same ballpark as say poultry. So are we going to see a big push here for increased biosecurity, even though we've said that there is no animal to animal transmission? What do you expect to happen there?
I think there will be some push, but it will just be what's reasonable. Of course, farms are not designed to keep cows completely separate from birds, but I think there will be some effort, especially in these areas, of making sure that those geese and wild birds stay away, maybe aren't in the same dugout with the ponds. Just there's been so many cases, and this virus is just so present right now throughout North America that I think the load is just so high. That's why these cows, especially the older cows with probably less strong, weaker immune systems, are the ones that are susceptible to this. So, yeah, like Lyndsey said, it's not spreading from cow to cow. Then it would be a major problem. Right now, it's just I think the viral load is so high that it's showing up in other species, especially in areas where there is this high pressure.
Yeah, and Stuart, we saw, I think it was the National Milk Producers Federation talking about how export markets, keep, there's no reason to close trade flows at this point, stay calm. That was, that's got to be a huge concern for the U.S. dairy industry because as protectionism around the world, we've already discussed, as that rises, people look, countries look for excuses like this. Think about what China's done to Canada at times with that atypical case of BSE. So the U.S. dairy industry has to be very concerned about disruption to trade flows at a time where the U.S. dairy farmer has not done exceptionally well financially.
No. And, it'll be interesting to see with all the discussions that we're having around our supply management system in Canada, if this pops up as an issue or an argument for the groups in Canada that are arguing to maintain our supply management system, and use this as maybe an argument. I don't know. But one thing I would say on the business side of this is, and this, I'm not personally a dairy expert, but we have a number of dairy experts on our team at MNP. And so I had a chat with our national leader, Kim Shipley of the Red Deer. She informed me that this issue could be a big issue if we see if it spreads and becomes, and starts impacting a large number of cattle. And specifically, the comment around that was that the producers, the dairy farmers right now have not been keeping a lot of young stock around. Feed prices have been high, and so they haven't been. There's not a lot of extra capacity sitting around. Plus, in Canada, we've seen some quota increases happen now just recently. So, you start combining some of those factors. If this got into Canada, we could all of a sudden see dairy cattle prices go, sky high, just because of the fact that we might, have all of a sudden have a shortage. So it wouldn't be good if it showed up here anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. It would be extremely short-sighted for the Canadian industry to be like, look what's happening in the U.S. Look, we're safer, to make those kinds of knee-jerk, because remember, it could easily happen here too. Yep. And then you're doing damage control to your own messaging that you had previously put out. So you got to be very, very cautious.
Why do you think they would say that though, Shaun? I'm curious.
So I'll give you a scenario. What they would do is they'd say, "Look, we're in the USMCA CUSMA agreement. We're bringing U.S. milk into Canada. So we told you that Canadian milk is safer. We shouldn't be bringing that product north."
I think you're creating a artificial argument here.
The key point here is HPAI is here too. It's in our environment too. There's just as much risk on the Canadian side. So I think at this point, this is a geographic issue. This is not a country border issue. And there's just as much chance of Canadian cattle potentially extract of this, or goats apparently. So so I think, as countries, I think we really should be more supportive than anything else, and supportive of the science of what we know and what we understand, and what this virus can do and not do.
I promise you that here's what I think is happening is that use ASF as the model on Canada and the U.S. working very diligently side by side to try to prevent ASF from coming to our shores. I would assume that the same thing is happening on this one. Is that fair, Kelvin?
Yeah, and I think if we had it in Canada, like Lyndsey said, and it easily could happen here with the amount of viral load that we know is in parts of Canada as well when it comes to avian influenza. We would have the same arguments. We would have the same messaging out there about food safety and the science of our milk still being safe and keeping trade open and borders, all those types of things. So that's where I don't know whether we should say that the Canadian dairy industry it would take a different approach than what the U.S. is, or that we're not on side with what's happening on the other side of the border.
Yeah, it would be extremely short-sighted if they did. Okay, that's all the time we have for this week's panel. Boy, time flew. Kelvin, have yourself a great weekend.
Thank you. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Lyndsey, happy Easter.
Yes, thank you. We didn't get to talk about the Blue Jays, so just pointing that out.
Well, next week. We will get to that next week, I promise you.
Okay.
I don't want to get those emails. All you talk about is baseball, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Stuart, have yourself a great weekend. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Happy Easter, everybody.
If you have any feedback on today's show, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or, of course, you can call that RealAg listener line. The feedback line is 855-776-6147. Happy Easter to everybody out there. Thank you so much for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Travalis Herbicide from FMC. When you need to protect cereals from a long list of the toughest in-crop weeds, Travalis Herbicide is a powerful performance in one small package. You don't need to crush your back when really what you want to do is crush weeds.